Okay, that's the meeting recording. So I'm now going to take the sediment of the Road Safety Forum on Tuesday the 30th of November 2021. Okay, I can see that we have Councillor Brown present. I have apologies from Councillor Kalikis. Councillor Chalmers? Nope. I can see that we have Councillors Cowie and Horsham present. We also have Councillors Mars and McLachlan. I have apologies from Councillor Nayland. Councillor Walker?
Here.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. And I can see that we have Councillor Wark present also. We also have a number of officers in attendance today, as well as Ben Adams from Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and PC Tim Hunter from Police Scotland. So with that, I'll pass you back to the Chair to commence today's business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Elizabeth Ann. Moving on to item 1, any declaration of interests? No, I'm seeing no hands. So moving swiftly on to the minutes of the previous meeting, which is on pages 3 to 8 of your pack. I would move those as a true and accurate record. Could I seek a seconder, please?
I can second that.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Or is that, I'm presuming that's why your hand is raised?
No, I wanted to make a point, if I may. I'm happy to second the minute, but I don't think I can because I wasn't here last time, so probably somebody else better second.
If we seek a seconder for the minute of the previous meeting, and then we'll move on to any matters arising.
I'll second them.
Thank you. Okay, so any matters arising? Councillor Brown, did you have a point on that?
Thank you. I wasn't here last time, so this may have been considered. But the school travel plans at number 5, these are all good things, and there's obviously good work being done in progressing them. I did wonder, however, and I think it's a point I've maybe asked before, whether they were, if you like, once they're put in place, they were kind of proactive documents, because I go to many of the school councils, as parent councils, as I know that others do in my area, and it's very rarely that the actual travel plan is actually raised, even though there are issues of transport and travel, come up on the agenda from time to time. And I just wonder whether, having got the travel plans in place, we actually make a reasonably significant effort to try and make sure that they're proactive documents where things follow from them. There are targets and objectives, and things happen, and we link in the walking to school days and all that in a proactive way into the school travel plans. Be grateful for any sort of comment from Stuart or whoever on that one.
Yes, Councillor Brown, I can absolutely assure you that they are dynamic documents, and there's ongoing engagement with schools on that, with new travel plans and travel plans already in place. Colin, did you wish to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can just add to that, Councillor. Each school travel plan does have set targets and initiatives within the plan. A lot of these are annual activities, as you've just spoken about, their walk to school weeks and taking part in bikeability, cycle sharing, etc. The other part of the targets and initiatives should be school specific to address anything that's been locally identified at the school. I would have hoped that each parent council would be aware of the school travel plan within their own school. That's perhaps a reaction I can take away, and just make sure when we're dealing with the schools and the head teachers or the responsible body that's put the travel plan together, that they do in fact communicate that out to the full school community. It's something we do advise them to do, and we've got some resources to help them do that as well. So I'll certainly take that forward as an action going forward. Thank you.
Councillor, you were muted there.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other matters arising from the minutes? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll move on to item 3, which is Scotland's Road Safety Framework to 2030. Colin.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this first report is to provide the members with an outline of Scotland's Road Safety Framework to 2030. The background is set out within item 3 of the paper. As you will be aware, the Road Safety Framework to 2020 ended in December last year. So this new framework was published in February 2021 to build upon the strength of the previous framework and targets. This new framework aligns to the Council's local transport strategy, which goes up to 2023. The local transport strategy seeks to reduce the number and severity of casualties within South Lanarkshire. So this new framework aligns to the priorities that are already set within the local transport strategy. When the new version of the local transport strategy is published in 2024, specific reference will be made to these new targets that are set out within the new road safety framework to 2030. The framework provides the vision for Scotland to have the best road safety performance in the world. It's a very ambitious vision there, and it's got a long-term vision of Vision Zero, so looking for zero fatalities or serious injuries on Scotland's roads by 2050. So it draws on the latest evidence and lots of data gathering across Scotland and again across the world when it comes to road safety. And it sets out new ambitious targets to 2030, and it's got a number of strategic actions over the next decade to meet the key performance indicators within the document. It's very much a collaborative approach, and it's a shared vision for the future where we all must input into road safety and look to better casualty reduction on our roads. The framework uses the words we and our throughout the document, again just highlighting it's not just a political or document for Scottish ministers, but for all road safety partners and for anyone who uses the road as well, whether it's to drive or to walk or to cycle or wheel. Members will be aware of a previous paper that was presented. It was on the consultation of this road safety framework, and that was in the 17th of November 2020 forum. So we outlined the draft framework and the kind of background to the document at that time, and much of that information remains the same for the published document. As we get to section 4, it outlines this new road safety framework to 2030. It has the framework has the motto, together making Scotland's roads safer. So again, just outlining the fact the framework is for all road users, and the visions, outcomes, the challenges, strategic actions and targets belong to not just local authorities or police or Transport Scotland, but collectively to every single person and every partner organisation. In line with international best practice, the framework embeds the safe system approach, and it looks to have a system where the roads become free from death and serious injury through targeted improvements within a kind of safety performance framework, which is where the targets and indicators come into play. The safe system puts people at the centre. So looking for a more forgiving road system that takes into account that humans are vulnerable, that are more vulnerable than metal vehicles up and down the road, and that sometimes people do make mistakes and collisions can happen, but the collisions shouldn't lead to death or serious injury. So it's very much a shift on reducing death and serious injury on the road. The safe system mitigates this with its 5 pillars as detailed within item 4.4. And it's safe road use, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads and roadsides, and post-crash response. And further details of them are provided within Appendix 1 of the paper. As we outlined previously with the consultation paper that was presented to the forum, 12 challenges have been identified with this new road safety framework if we are looking to reduce road casualties within our network. The 12 challenges are detailed within item 4.6. And then after these 12 challenges, there are 12 strategic actions that have been identified to address these, and they're detailed within item 4.7. Rather than reading out the list there, obviously there's fuller detail within Appendix 3 of these strategic actions, and also further information within the full framework document. So the strategic actions are detailed in 4.7. These will be further divided down into sub-actions and kind of further deliverables through the framework as it develops more pace within Transport Scotland. And what they are looking to do is set out both a national delivery plan and a local delivery plan, which will align to these targets that are within the document here. In terms of governance, 4.9 details the governance structure of the road safety framework. When the road safety framework to 2020 was established, a strategic partnership board and an operational partnership board were put into play. And these were put into play to govern, monitor and deliver the framework. With the new version of the 2030 framework, it introduces a further local group to the governance structure, and that is a local partnership forum. So there's 3 that have been set up so far, one for the west of Scotland, one for the east and one for the north. And the local partnership forums are going to meet twice a year, and it's to improve connectivity and exchange of information from the local level to the strategic level and disseminate information both up and down that ladder there. The local partnership forums are not going to duplicate or reduce or take away any work of local partnership groups or forums, but it's a supplemental avenue to address these issues at a local level and be able to feed them up on the national picture as well. Appendix 4 details full information of the local partnership forum and its remit. So as I said, the SAFE system work is based on a performance framework with a kind of hierarchy of targets. And from item 4.11, it details what these are. So there's a long-term goal of 0 fatalities and serious injuries in road transport by 2050. And then 4 interim outcome targets to 2030 have been confirmed and set based on the 2014 to 2018 baseline. And they're detailed within item 4.11. So it's a 50% reduction in people killed, 50% reduction in serious injuries, a 60% reduction in children killed, and a 60% reduction in children seriously injured. In addition to those 4 targets, there's been intermediate outcome targets set as well. Within the draft version of the framework, these were headlines, some indicators without percentages attached to them. So some of these now have percentages attached and are included within item 4.12. So these are going to monitor the performance of casualty figures for specific road user groups or specific ages of road user as well. So 4.12 details what these are. So it's a 40% reduction in pedestrians killed or seriously injured, a 20% reduction in cyclists killed or seriously injured, and a 30% reduction in motorcyclists killed or seriously injured. There's then a couple of age-based groups, 20% reduction in older road users killed or seriously injured, and then a 70% reduction in road users between 17 to 25 years of age killed or seriously injured. There's 2 further measures, the percentage of motorists driving within the posted speed limit, and that percentage reduction is still to be set for that indicator there. And also the casualty rate for the most deprived SIMD areas should be reduced equal to the least deprived 10% SIMD area as well. So a further number of key performance indicators, as I said, were noted within the draft framework, and these are still in development at this current moment in time. And it's anticipated that these will be contained within the Road Safety Framework's first annual delivery plan. It's expected that responsibility for all of these will be placed on Transport Scotland or some other national lead delivery partner for action and for monitoring of these. It's also noted in item 4.14 that Transport Scotland will undertake a national speed management review and the development of a national strategy for 20 mph zones and limits in Scotland, which the Council do welcome. We look forward to seeing what comes out of those actions there. Appendix 5 shows the national targets in an easy to read 1-page format, which is quite good for our own reference. As we get to section 5, the implications for ourselves within South Lanarkshire. The targeted reduction in killed and seriously injured casualties to 2030, as you see, is very ambitious, both for child casualties and for all ages. And maintaining and furthering reductions at a local level will be particularly challenging, considering the positive action we've had so far with our interventions and the reductions that we have seen. The intermediate outcome targets that target the road user groups or the ages, again, are ambitious as well. And we'll look to undertake some investigation work into these to establish a baseline for these vulnerable age groups and road users. And where appropriate, we'll look at the causation factors for these as well to see which actions we can consider to reduce the casualties for them. We are supportive of the interim targets and the intermediate outcome targets and the ethos of the longer term Vision Zero as contained within this document. And we do recognise that it is a national effort that is needed, and that is required to achieve these ambitious targets here. The traditional 4 E's of road safety, education, engineering, enforcement and encouraging, remain relevant, but they require to be combined with the safe system approach. There are only certain elements that we have direct responsibility for as a local authority, therefore effective partnership working is crucial so as we can input into these national targets and see the reductions that are hoped for locally. Our resources will be targeted towards preventing or reducing the severity of road traffic casualties on our road network and by working closely with our partner organisations. Our approach to casualty reduction in terms of the identification and prioritising of locations for road safety accident and investigation work was set out in a report to the Forum on the 5th of December 2017. And within that, you will have noted that the minimum number of collisions that allow for a kind of reasonable treatment pattern to be identified is 3 collisions. The way we address this is on an annual basis. Usually at the end of the year, a 3-year council-wide analysis is undertaken to identify where collisions are taking place within our road network. And there are 3 types of location that we look at for potential intervention. We have single sites where collision clusters are identified. We've got our rural routes where a section of road with a higher than average collision rate is identified, and potentially area-wide schemes. As a result of the new framework, we'll do a review of the methodology for all of these and look to put a weighting factor for the higher severity casualties to be applied, as well as for those involving vulnerable road user groups as detailed within item 4.12. And any methodology changes will be tested and trialled during the 2021 annual review. So 5.7 details on an annual basis a review of progress towards the 4 interim outcome targets to 2030 will be presented to the Forum, and a breakdown of the causation factors for the casualty age groups and road users within 5.7 will be given as well. And they're just listed within item 5.7 for reference there. In terms of the local partnership forum, South Lanarkshire Council will be represented within this new structure within the framework. And the first meeting was actually held on the 22nd of November 2021. So we will input into that forum there and look to align our actions and feed into this forum where possible. And as our processes will continue to be reviewed as the framework and its actions are developed as well. In terms of employee implications, the delivery of road safety measures and casualty reduction measures will continue to be supported by the Council using existing employees and in partnership with external organisations. And potential for any larger works we may need to go to using contractors for that where possible. With regards to financial implications, the challenge and outcome targets of the framework do require significant investment to meet these ambitious targets. A proportion of the work can be accommodated through our existing budgets. However, we will continue to secure external funding to look to address other measures. There's no budget in place for larger projects, which will rely on additional external funding being sourced. In terms of climate change, sustainability and environmental implications, there's no immediate implications in terms of these, but it should be noted that many of the outcomes and actions interlink with the current and emerging challenges, including climate emergency, active travel and sustainable travel potential, and all of these can potentially make some positive contributions. The report doesn't introduce a new policy function or strategy, and therefore no impact assessment is required. The Forum is therefore asked to approve the following recommendations, and that is to note the Road Safety Framework to 2030, which includes these national targets and measures for casualty reduction to 2030. And to note that the local transport strategy policy remains unchanged in terms of the Council continuing to contribute towards national casualty reduction targets. And that the methodologies for accident investigation and prevention, annual data studies will be adapted to provide weighting factors for fatal and serious collisions, as well as for targeted vulnerable road user groups, as detailed within the new framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. It's a mammoth report, so thank you very much. Are Are there any questions or comments?
Councillor Brown, Chair.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I mean, as you comment on, this is really a very important report with a lot of implications, but it does strike me that although what's described as ambitious targets is fine, I think we'd all agree with them if we possibly can, the gap between where we are just now and achieving them is really the challenge here. And we've made good progress over a number of years, I think, in broadly reducing the number of casualties by the methods that have taken place. We've seen the road traffic statistics over time. But one presumably would imagine that unless there are significant major differences in what we do, then achieving the ambitious targets will not be possible. And I just wanted to ask if there were major technological things or new things or things coming out of the National Road Improvement Fund, which we don't seem to have any figures for at the moment, or anything like that, which would be of help. 2 or 3 other comments, if I may. There's talk about the national strategy for 20-mile-an-hour zones. Now, I think I'm right in saying there has been some discussion about whether there might be a generalised 20-mile-an-hour limit in residential areas. And given the actual cost of bringing these things in and the kind of spasmodic nature of them, and perhaps to some extent the question whether they're actually obeyed in practical terms, I just wonder if an actual national target, a national residential zones speed limit thing is something that is still likely under the strategy, or if that's been sort of abolished, if you like. A couple of other points, if I may. The whole thing, I think, is focused on traffic. And behind it, there perhaps lies a kind of theme about, should we be giving more priority to pedestrians? Is there a kind of like a road safety thing that sort of says, well, in certain residential areas in particular, the priority of pedestrians is important, and we should be actually manoeuvring our road development things in that particular sort of way. And finally, just in terms of the way forward, the biggest thing probably that I get in my ward in this area is obviously speed. And we have a lot of engagement on that. Practically every crossroad in Rutherglen, you would have complaints about speed at some particular point. I'm sure that's the case in many other areas as well. Now, tackling speed, which has obviously got a very close link with accidents, is quite tricky. You get many people who obey speed limits, many people who drive just above them, and the number of people who drive dangerously above them, who are very difficult to pin down because they're obviously the more spasmodic episodes there. So things like speed bumps and other things like that, chicanes and all of that, which are obviously quite costly to bring about, are possibly quite an important thing in looking at reduction of speed. And yet we're fairly resistant to that in most places other than where there's developer contributions towards it. Is that something we should be given some priority to, or some other thing that would actually make a difference in terms of the overall speed limits and speed levels and active speeds, if you like, used by people, which will make a bit of a difference in this area? So there's a bit of a rant, but it's just a number of, I think, quite important issues there for me.
You've covered a lot of ground there, Councillor Brown, and I have opinion on almost all of it, but I'll leave it to Stuart or Colin, whoever is most appropriate to answer, if I may.
I'll answer parts of that, and if I miss anything, I'm sure Colin will be scribbling down and answer the other ones that I haven't covered. I think when it comes to how this framework is going to be delivered, I think we need to recognise that there will be things coming out nationally over the coming months and probably years as well about how what methods can be, or what further methods can be introduced to bring down the casualty rates. I think, as you mentioned right at the start, we do and have had really successful initiatives over the last framework. And a lot of the good practices that we have developed will continue into this next new framework as well. In terms of where we are in terms of the targets, that's a section of work that myself and Colin will be working on and bringing to in my future road safety forum, as we always do after our annual assessment. And I think how we draw that line in the sand of where we think we need to get to is obviously going to be very, very difficult to get to, just by the very nature of the ambitions of the targets themselves. But that's not to say that it's impossible, and we certainly put as much resources as we can into trying to achieve those. It does. I think the way the framework has been developed, it isn't all down to the council to provide. It's down to working with partners, some of whom are on the call today. It's working with communities, and it's really, I think I can sense a sort of flip of responsibility around to everyone who uses the road network has a responsibility. Whether you're driving, cycling, wheeling, or walking, it's your responsibility to, first of all, adhere to the law, but also adhere to the good practice that's identified within the highway code, etc. So I think reading between the lines of what's coming out, I think there'll be a lot of focused campaigns. And you've obviously mentioned speed, and it's something that we'll talk about later this morning, one of the other papers. There was the bill that was unsuccessful getting passed through the Scottish Parliament a couple of years ago, which was looking to reduce in urban areas all the speeds down to 20 miles an hour. That is still bubbling away in the background. It's certainly identified in our local transport strategy as an action to try and reduce all the speeds within urban areas down to 20 miles an hour. And there is different ways of doing that. And obviously the next paper discusses an approach that we've undertaken through the Spaces for People project. But just looking at the sort of wider ways of dealing with that, obviously how do you reduce the speed limits? Do you impose new speed limits? Do you put in physical measures? Do you undertake more enforcement? It's probably all of the above when it comes to this kind of thing, and the responsibility for someone driving appropriately. Driving within the speed limit doesn't always necessarily mean driving appropriately. So drivers themselves need to take responsibility for their own actions. So I think in terms of what we're, as a council, we're currently considering and taking forward is looking at some of the campaigns that we've got. Myself and Colin have got the bones of our campaign together that is going to focus on speeding within urban areas, within residential streets. We're also looking at our sort of rural road network as well, where there's a different set of issues, particularly when you're away from the built-up area. So those are the kind of things that we're initially looking at, but I suspect over time there'll be more initiatives coming out from if it's not a regional level, it will certainly be from a national level. So I think I've sort of covered most points there. The other one you mentioned was pedestrian safety and how we can look to reduce casualty figures when it comes to pedestrians. And I think when you look at the sort of casualty statistics for South Lanarkshire, there is those sort of vulnerable groups, the sort of younger and older generations, where if they are involved in an accident, then the likelihood is there's a tendency for it to become a more serious accident or even fatal. So how do we get those messages over to pedestrians to essentially concentrate on when they're crossing the road, identify where potential risks are, and obviously take actions. So we've over a period of time, we do have various campaigns, we do have various initiatives out there that we focus on pedestrians, some of which you may have seen recently through the sort of calendar competition as well, where we try and choose various headings that bring forward people's thoughts about how they should be crossing the road, or distractions, for example. That's a recent campaign that Colin's taken forward. So I think, go back to what I said earlier, it's really one thing is not going to resolve casualty reduction. It's going to be a sort of basket of measures through stuff, work that the council do, but also work from partners as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McLaughlin, I can see your hands up.
Thanks, Chair. Robert obviously raised quite a few questions here, and I want to ask Stuart in response to some of the questions, in particular the one that you mentioned about speed limits. You could do various things like changing speed limits, putting in physical things. I'm assuming you're talking about speed humps, but you also mentioned more enforcement, and that's my question about more enforcement. Where we have, I mean, it's ever increasing the amount of 20 mile an hour speed limits that we're getting to in various areas, and that's welcome. But my own personal experience where I live, I live in a 20 mile an hour zone, from Burnbank, Watley Farm Road, right up to Hillhouse Road. The whole area is a 20. But I've never seen any enforcement, and that's been there. Maybe you can help me on this, Stuart. It's 7-8 years, maybe longer, since that's been a 20 mile an hour zone. But I've never once seen any enforcement. I've never. Social media is a great thing because you hear about people when they get caught doing this, that, and they moan because it's the big bad police that's caught them or some other nonsense. But you never actually. I've never heard of anyone, and I live in the zone. I've never heard of anyone been charged with speeding in excess of the 20 miles an hour in the 20 zones. So when you say more enforcement, I would like to see something. I've never seen any enforcement. So could you comment on that, please, Stuart?
Yeah, I think when it comes to enforcement, we work fairly closely with the Road Policing Division over in Motherwell, and between us we have fairly regular conversations about inquiries that have been received, both from via the police, but also stuff that you guys get as local members, and stuff that we get directly to the service. So as I said, on a fairly regular basis, we have these conversations, and as a consequence of that, there are actions given out to either the policing division themselves or the local officers to undertake regular actions. So where these are undertaken, then we tend to get feedback. An example of that would be in Crisford, for example. There was a petition received by the council. It was considered by the petitions committee, and as a consequence of that, there was enforcement action undertaken. And it's quite interesting. One of the lead petitioner, when he was advised what the outcome of that was, that he said, I didn't see any police officers there. So he, in his head, he hadn't seen any enforcement, therefore it hadn't happened. And I suppose there's maybe two aspects of that. The first is, obviously the police are there, we've got the stats, so we know it has happened. But it's maybe on how that is publicised at a point after that. That's maybe the missing link. We also, both police, fire service, we sit on the Road Safety Governance Board that is run by Police Scotland for both North and South Lanarkshire, and we're probably due to meet fairly soon. And that's maybe a point that I can raise in that forum, to say that we've had this conversation, and it's maybe how we can better identify the outcomes of any enforcement action. It's probably a tricky one, but I can imagine that we can probably come to a point where we can say during the months of June we undertook this enforcement action, and this is what the outcome was.
Can I come back in on that, Chair? Just to respond to Chair.
Of course.
Yeah. No, I take your point, Stuart. Because you don't see it doesn't mean to say that it's never happened, and that's bound to be the case in a lot of places. But I think it's maybe a kind of a general perception that, take Hillhouse Road, for example. There's a speed camera up there, and people slow down to get to the speed camera and they speed up and go away about their business. and not as often as you used to see, but in fact, I can't remember the last time I seen it, but you would have regular roadside traffic officers with their cameras, their guns, whatever, their speed traps. I can't remember the last time I seen that on and we spoke a lot about Fernagare in my area where there's been issues. I've yet to see that there, but that's not to say that it hasn't happened. But because it's so few, and I know that police numbers are reducing, and you hear about it a lot, and police numbers are reducing, in particular in the traffic department. It tends to be the public perception that there's less enforcement. But in 20 mile an hour zones, as I said, you hear about people, you hear about it, you hear it in the grapevine. I just wonder if you could maybe find out about in this board that you're speaking about, Stuart, how much do the police, the traffic department actually target 20 zones? And I'm really interested in it because I've raised concerns. There's a street just round from me, and I walk my dog in the evening. And it's a long straight. It's just along the back of John O'Groats High School. There are speed humps in the middle of the road, but it's these cushions where if you get your tyres either side of it, you hardly feel any impact of the humps. And people haven't got a gun on me or a speed trap to tell you what speed they're doing, but I think I'm a decent judge of that. And people are regularly doing in excess of 40 miles an hour in these areas. And the noise, people, it's a residential street, people are in their beds, in their homes, watching the TVs, and the traffic is by at that speed. And that's just feedback I get from my constituents. People feel just completely scunnered that they've got a 20 mile an hour zone. People are thundering by at 40 and in excess of 40 miles an hour, and nobody's ever seen any police trying to enforce that in that area. So specifically, could you maybe find out in feedback, Stuart, if the traffic department actually have physical presences within 20 zones, not just behind somebody and catch them in a car, but in an area to show? Because if you see the cameras are around, or if you see the police stop in an area, you might see them once, but that will keep your mind sharp for a very long time, that that's an area that they're prone to visit, but nobody ever sees it. And that's really my concern. I'll really welcome the 20 mile an hour zones if people stuck to them, but they're only going to stick to them if it's enforced and there's something visible to let people see that it's likely to be enforced.
Councillor, if I could just come in before calling on that I do take your point, and it's important that people understand the importance of 20 mile an hour of limits and adhere to them. And I absolutely am aware that the police do attend 20 mile an hour limits, particularly around schools. I'm well aware over a number of years of many instances when the police are in attendance and are speed monitoring and speaking to drivers and doing some publicity after that. And the publicity is absolutely key. You're absolutely right. The publicity is key so that people understand that they are being watched in terms of their speed. It will be noted and it will be enforced. But I think also what you've alluded to, and I think is really important, that this is as much about behavioural change as it is about enforcement. Whether there is a reality the police cannot be in every single area 100% of the time. And in the same way as wearing a seatbelt has become a behavioural change and the norm, and people not drinking and driving has become socially unacceptable, I hope that over time the behavioural change will be to slow down because it's the right thing to do and not because necessarily there's a police officer standing there that's going to enforce it with you. But I do take your points. Colin, did you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, just very quickly, you've kind of stole my thunder slightly. On the speed thing, I was just about to say it's something that's not going to happen overnight, particularly with the 20 mile per hour zones, limits, areas, that it does require drivers to have a different mindset driving through these areas, and they're not all getting enforced all at the same time. And it requires that mindset change, which is one of the kind of key challenges, one of the key actions within the framework. What I was just going to mention as well, Councillor Brown had mentioned quite a number of different points there, and it does require some significant change. I was just highlight the fact that the framework is very holistic in its approach to casualty reduction, that it's looking at different policies across climate change, active and sustainable travel, health, right across the board, whereas previously might just have looked at roads issues alone in their own silo, but the framework is going across all different policy areas. So it is going to look at active and sustainable travel, how and where cyclists or pedestrians should be prioritised and then having the impact on casualty reduction with those types of schemes. One of the things you mentioned as well was technology, and technology is expected to have a significant impact on casualty reduction over the next few years, over the next decade or so. So if we're looking at things like alcohol locks and the different types of technology that can be inbuilt within cars, and the safety of the build of vehicles as well, all these things are being looked at and built into the forecast model for casualty reduction, so they're expected to have a very big impact. And again, one of the areas that we don't have any direct involvement in is post-crash response as well. So working with the ambulance service and emergency responders to reduce the amount of time between an emergency call and attendance at the scene has got a very direct impact upon the result of the injuries in those instances. So it's a very holistic approach with the framework, and there are some kind of changes being looked at through this as well. Speed is number one in the strategic action within the framework document. And I mentioned the National Speed Indicator. What they're looking to do with that is to set a baseline of speed compliance across the road network, both strategic roads, your motorways, your A-class roads, down to local roads, including 20 mile per hour, and then be able to track speed compliance on a year-on-year basis. And what that will allow is targeted behaviour change campaigns and initiatives to be looked at and implemented to change people's behaviour within certain aspects of the road network. One of the other ones I just want to highlight as well is they're going to be looking at a diversionary course for drivers that are stopped as well. So rather than receiving penalty points and a fine, the model we've got down in England to look towards a diversionary course of engagement, behaviour change, education, so that hopefully these drivers won't go on to do that again. So there are new things within the framework and new things that are being investigated and planned, and more will come on board as the framework develops as well. So just that wee point there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I see Stuart has his hand up.
Yeah, just very briefly. I think the comments that Councillor McLachlan's made is very similar to the comments that myself and Colin were discussing when we were reviewing the new framework, but also how we would consider taking forward many campaigns that we've got that I mentioned earlier in relation to the urban environment and the rural road network as well. So it is something that how we go about, how we, as in everyone, goes about using the road network. It's not about from getting to from A to B as quickly as possible. It's from getting from A to B as safely as possible. And I think that's the difference in messaging that's that will come out over the next period.
Yes, quite. Colin, did you have anything to add? I see your hand still up. Is it a legacy hand? Yep. Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't see any further hands up at this point. Are we agreed that we note the contents of the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 4. I feel we're going to have some further discussion on the points we've already raised. So item 4 is the spaces for people 20 mile an hour town centre and schools limits. Stuart, over to you. You're on mute, Stuart. Sorry.
Apologies for that. I just finished as well. The purpose of this report is to update the forum on the Spaces for People 20 mile per hour project in town centres and outside schools. The background is set out in section 3 of the papers. And it was subject to a previous report to this forum, but just very briefly, as a response to the pandemic, Scottish Government launched Spaces for People grant funding, which allowed local authorities to implement temporary measures to support social distancing and active travel messages through the pandemic. The council itself was awarded funding for 4 projects, 2 of which relates to what we're discussing this morning in relation to 20 mile per hour speed limits. It's also worth noting that in 2015, this forum was presented with a paper on 20 mile per hour speed limits, and the recommendations from that led to how we had dealt with the setting of those limits since then. Moving to the Spaces for People project itself, we undertook some initial measures at the start of the pandemic, which involved various messaging, and again that was reported in a previous paper. At that previous paper, we also identified that we would be taking forward a second phase of measures, and that was to introduce 20 mile per hour speed limits outside schools and also outside town centres. In terms of the schools, it was intention to incorporate gateway signage accompanied by coloured surfacing, as well as 20 mile per hour carriageway markings as well. So in total there was 88 school locations, and these were selected on the basis that they didn't have existing measures outside the schools. The locations themselves were put to local members. It was also communicated to the schools, various liaison with between officers and staff at the schools, and it was also made available to the public via the council's website, and those locations are identified in Appendix A of these papers. We also supplemented the physical works with banners outside schools, as well as post straps around poles to further promote the 20 mile per hour messaging and the reasoning behind the project. And those graphics are shown in Appendix B of today's papers. Moving to the town centres, the second phase of measures, we looked at 6 town centres. Those were Straven, Bothwell, Larkhall, Uddingston, Kirtlook and Lanark. And again, similar to the schools, we incorporated gateway signage, coloured surfacing, supplemented by carriageway markings. And again, that was to get over the message of changing characteristics within the sort of busier parts of these towns. Again, post straps were displayed at these locations, and again, those graphics are shown in Appendix B. In order to provide the legislative background to this 20 mile per hour speed limits, we introduced temporary traffic regulation orders, and these were put through the statutory process for traffic regulation orders, and because of the legislation that was put in place for COVID, we were able to do that very, very quickly. So again, these traffic regulation orders were promoted and were successful in going through that process. Traffic regulation orders are in place for an 18-month period, and as the column was advised previously, as the forum was advised previously, we would seek to consider these for permanent speed limit orders in due course, and that's the body of this report considers the sort of outcome of our before and after analysis for that. So we undertook speed measurements last February and in October, November this year, and we've essentially done a comparison. So when it comes to the setting of speed limits, we consider what the mean speeds are and what the 85th percentile speeds are. The relationship, as we spoke of earlier in the forum meeting today, the relationship between speed and the likelihood of a collision, as well as severity of any injury, is quite complex, but there is a strong correlation. It's been shown that for every one mile per hour reduction in average speed, collision frequencies reduces by around 5%. So based upon the data within the paper today, it's estimated that an 11.5% reduction in casualty frequency could be ascribed to town centre locations, and a 5.5% reduction outside schools. The report or the reporting that we do in casualty statistics, we always have a look and see what contributory factors are. And excessive speed and travelling too fast is cited within these contributory factors in road traffic collisions. Other contributory factors such as loss of control or careless, reckless driving or in a hurry can also be related to excessive speed or inappropriate speed, and we've had a look at contributory factors, including these as well. So when we look at national figures and South Lanarkshire collision factors, then speed does appear in roughly about a third of the collisions within the sort of period that we have assessed. Speeds within the 6 town centres were measured, and we also looked at the volumes of traffic as well as we moved through various restrictions of the pandemic. So the vehicle speeds, the vehicle volumes increased by roughly 40% within the town centres when we compare February this year to September this year. The speeds also fell, and 85th percentile speeds fell by 5.6%. The average speeds fell by nearly 9%, 8.8%, and that equates to a fall in 85th percentile speeds of 1.7 miles an hour and mean speeds of 2.3 miles an hour. So it indicated that all the sites experienced speed reductions. Moving to the schools, we measured 17 school locations, and I should have said that the details both for the town centres and the schools are attached to this paper in the appendices. Again, vehicle volumes increased within the residential areas where the schools were. And again, the 85th percentiles fell, and they fell by 3%, which was 1.1 miles an hour. And the mean speeds also reduced. They reduced by 3.8%, which equated to roughly 1.1 miles an hour. It is worth noting that while 14 sites experienced mean speeds decreasing, there were 3 sites that experienced increases. The 3 sites that experienced increases are listed in paragraph 7.3 of the papers. It's worth noting that of those schools, 2 of them were the speeds were fairly low in any event, and the other one just seems to be a buck against the trend with a rise of 0.9 miles an hour. The overall speed measurements indicate that the general suitability of the 20 mile per hour speed limits within both the towns and the school settings. Further measures we think will be considered where after vehicle speeds are higher than what we had originally desired, and at locations which span sort of longer or larger areas would benefit from some additional carriageway markings and potentially some other suitable features to remind drivers of the 20 mile per hour speed limit. We also undertook a consultation exercise in October for both the school and the town centre locations. The consultation for the towns received 148 respondents. We consider that to be a low response rate, which was a bit disappointing. But the findings we've listed in paragraph 8.2 of the papers. 56% feel that there is a need to provide a reduced speed limit to 20 mile per hour, and we asked them where those locations should be, and the top 3 ranking responses were outside schools, within town centres or shopping areas, and within residential areas. So 52% strongly supported the introductions, and there was 31% were strongly against the implementation of the revised speed limits. We've also looked at how that was split between the different towns. 5 out of the 6 strongly supported or slightly supported the introduction of the 20 mile per hour speed limits, and there was 1 location that didn't support that, with 45% either strongly supporting or slightly supporting that, so it was just below the 50%. We also asked various questions, and one of those was the top 3 reasons for supporting 20 mile per hour speed limits, and it was the feedback we got was that it makes the area safer for pedestrians. A decrease in traffic speeds would reduce collisions and casualties, and it would make streets more pleasant to move around in. Those that were opposed to it cited that it might be ignored by drivers, it would increase congestion, and it would not make any difference to pedestrian safety. We also asked about the extents of the 20 mile per hour speed limits that were in place, and the feedback that we got was that they thought 30% thought that the speed limits were appropriate, while 31% wished them to be smaller, 23% wished them to be larger. So, in conclusion, for the town centre locations, we were able to identify that the speed limits have reduced, and there seems to be a feeling that they're reasonably well placed to allow speeds to be reduced, and the statistics show that the speeds themselves have reduced. Moving to the schools and the consultation there, we got 662 respondents, and again some headline figures. 92% of those that responded feel there was a need to reduce the speeds on the road network. And again, the locations were outside schools, within residential areas, and also where there was a significant number of pedestrians. And outside schools, 89% strongly supported the introduction of the 20 mile per hour speed limits, with only 2% strongly against. Those that were in support of the speed limits cited reasons for supporting them would be that it makes the area feel safe for pedestrians, decrease traffic speeds to reduce casualties, and it would also make these areas safer for cyclists. Those that were in opposition felt again that they would be ignored by drivers, wouldn't make a difference to pedestrian safety, and may not be policed and enforced effectively. 64% thought the extents were appropriate. Moving to section 9 of the papers, the conclusion part, it was considered that the town and school speed limits have had a positive impact upon reducing vehicle speeds and therefore road safety. There was also feeling that it would have a positive effect on health. It also helped promote active travel and climate change as well. Consultation feedback for the schools was in strong support of the limits, and there was a general support for the speed limits within the town centre environs. It's as a consequence of that, it's proposals to have a look at what's been in place with a view to undertaking some minor alterations where appropriate, and also move towards permanent promotion of the 20 mile per hour speed limits. It should be noted that there's continued national desire to support the introduction of more 20 mile per hour speed limits within suitable settings. National strategy for 20 mile per hour zones and limits in Scotland is currently being progressed by Transport Scotland, as well as a national speed management review. And as we mentioned earlier, we are welcoming this, and we'll consider this further when further information is provided. The Council will consider the findings from other local authorities as well, that were successful in implementing 20 mile per hour speed limits as part of their own Spaces for People funding. And we will monitor and evaluate our own 20 mile per hour locations as well. Also, in the interim, we'll have a look at some of our other towns and village settings to see if they would be suitable for the introduction of 20 mile per hour speed limits as well. With regards to the schools, it's proposed that those that don't have mandatory 20 mile per hour speed limits or part-time 20 mile per hour speed limits should now be considered for further expansion of 20 mile per hour speed limits outside schools. And again, we'll have a look at the existing settings that the schools and the characteristics surrounding those schools. And again, when it comes to the existing part-time 20 mile per hour speed limits that are currently in place outside schools, we will review those locations and see whether a mandatory 20 speed limit would be more effective and cost effective in those particular surroundings. And we'll also engage and look at these features through the progression of school travel planning. Finally, moving to employee implications, there's no employee implications with taking these schemes forward. They'll be undertaken utilising existing resources. In terms of financial implications, the Spaces for People project is essentially concluded, and any future 20 mile per hour speed limit introductions will require to have suitable funding identified. In terms of climate change, that's set out in section 12 of the papers, and there's no other implications associated with this particular paper in terms of policy. And finally, the forum is asked to note the contents of this report, that the detailed 20 mile per hour Spaces for People projects be supported towards being made permanent, and that the continued setting of school and town centre 20 mile per hour speed limits be supported at locations as deemed appropriate. That's back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Are there any questions or comments on this paper?
No hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Margaret.
Sorry, Chair. Just a wee point in your list of schools. Number 61, Loch Primary and St Anthony's Primary School in Rutherglen. You've got that under Ward 13. It's actually Ward 11. It's in my ward.
Thank you. Thank you. If the papers could reflect that. Thank you. Thank you. If there are no other questions or comments, are we agreed to note the contents of the report, that the 20 mile an hour limits around town centres and schools are supported to become permanent, and to continue to look at other settings where these might be appropriate?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is education, training and publicity initiatives. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise the forum of the ongoing education, training and publicity initiatives within South Lanarkshire. The first item to note is item 3.3, the Junior Road Safety Officer Scheme. As the forum will be aware, we invite all primary, private and additional support needs schools with primary school pupils to appoint 1 or 2 pupils within their school to be Junior Road Safety Officers. An invite was issued out to all schools for academic term 2020-21. Sorry, an invite was sent out for the new academic year 2021-22, and resources were then provided to the schools to support this initiative. Personal organisers, lanyards, a selection of prizes were given to the pupils to help them in their duties within the school. The role of the Junior Road Safety Officer involves partnership working, promotion of road safety, peer learning, and engaging within the school community regarding specific localised road safety issues, or to promote national initiatives and events that are ongoing. 99 schools registered to take part in the scheme during the current academic year, and that's a total of 227 junior road safety officers being supported by their adult coordinators within the school. Typically, it's 1 or 2 JRSOs are appointed, but some schools have taken the opportunity to form larger committees or to take this forward as a leadership group within the school to involve more pupils. As a slight update, we've actually just broke the numbers there at 100 schools currently just now, so a wee slight update on that. We're now in 3 figures, which is good. This compares to last academic term, where we had 53 schools taking part in the scheme. That was quite a low uptake year, but again, that was due to the impact of COVID and the pressures on education at that moment in time. Detail on 3.1.6 is a number of mailings that we provide to schools to give schools and the junior road safety officers information and resources to then implement within their school to promote key road safety messages or themes to fellow pupils and staff as well. So we've seen October 2020 with a Be Safe, Be Seen theme. In March 2021 it was a Step Into Spring theme. Then in June 2021 was Here Comes Summer with a Speed Awareness theme. So we will continue with those this academic year as well, and currently our schools are looking at the Be Safe, Be Seen theme. Some have implemented Be Bright Days and some are planning for them at the current moment in time. As we move on to item 3.2, it's our calendar competition. So again, all schools are invited on an annual basis to participate within this calendar competition. There are 5 groups, 5 categories with different themes set. The pupils all think on that theme and come up with a slogan and an illustration to go alongside it. The topics for this year are detailed in 3.2.2, and the competition closed on the 24th of September 2021. We received just under 3,000 entries this year, and that was from 99 schools who entered into the competition. So thank you very much to the 4 members who inputted into the judging process and cast their votes for this competition. I'm pleased to announce the winner of the competition. The winner this year is from Chapelton Primary School. So it's a primary 7 pupil, Freya Richardson, with her illustration and message, "Why drive a car if you don't need to go far?" So again, the car theme, the sustainable travel theme coming through there. So that's Freya Richardson from Chapelton Primary School, who is our competition overall winner. So she and our school have been communicated with, so they know that just now, so that's fine. The rest of the winners, I still have to let them know, and then I'll send those details out to the 4 members just to let you know who all the group winners of the competition are as well. Moving on to item 3.3. A pedestrian distraction campaign was devised to raise awareness within communities of the dangers and hazards that pedestrians can experience by being distracted by mobile phones or music or whatever on their walk near roads. It included a 6-week social media focus with 1 post a week having a specific illustration and message surrounding this campaign. So each of the messages that were communicated are detailed within item 3.3.2. So just covering some of the kind of key themes that we thought were beneficial to raise. To support the online social media activity, AP correct signs were designed, which can be affixed to existing street furniture in selected town centres, and they were put in place in conjunction with ground stenciling as well. A3 posters and leaflets were devised to support this campaign as well. It was launched and implemented within Larkhall Town Centre and can now be used in locations where this is deemed to be appropriate in the future as well. Further information is on the Council's website at the link detailed in item 3.3.4. As a kind of lead on from this campaign, we have developed a driver distraction campaign as well to focus on drivers and some of the distractions that they can come across or be involved within as well. These 5 themes cover a variety of distractions in the car and also out with the car as well. And the 5 social media themes are detailed in item 3.4.3. Again, further information is on the council website as detailed in the link under that item. Bikeability Scotland cycle training continues to be promoted and implemented within our schools within South Lanarkshire. All primary schools were invited to participate at the start of this academic session, and instructor training courses were arranged and delivered in tandem with this offer. 4 instructor training courses were delivered by traffic and transportation officers, and 20 candidates were certified as Bikeability Scotland instructors after these courses. Through external funding from Cycling Scotland, we have contracted Biketown, we are part of Healthy and Happy Community Development Trust, to undertake some pupil bikeability training within a selected number of schools as the funding allows, including at this moment in time. The aim of this is to increase cycle training uptake by schools and to facilitate self-led delivery in future years. The majority of pupil cycle training takes place in roughly the kind of spring to summer term, and a bikeability update will be provided on conclusion of this current academic year. The last item 3.6, details the Scottish Government's Drive Like Grands in the Car campaign. This is an ongoing campaign that's run jointly in conjunction with the Scottish Government and Road Safety Scotland, and it focuses mainly on young male drivers aged 20 to 29 to encourage them to adopt safe driving habits. The campaign messaging is shared within South Lanarkshire Council's social media as well. Themes cover driving in country roads, excessive speed, distractions, drink and drug driving, and vulnerable road users, and it uses a familiar grand character in the hashtag #DriveSmart. So this campaign hopes it will make young drivers evaluate their own driving behaviour, and full campaign assets and materials can be accessed on the Road Safety Scotland website, as is linked within the paper here. In terms of employee implications, there's no employee implications associated with the report. Financial implications, item 3.5.4 was funded by Cycling Scotland at the cost detailed within the paper, and all other costs were by external partners or funded from the Council's own revenue budget. Item 6 details the climate change, sustainability and environmental implications. There are no other significant risks with this report and no equality impact assessment required. So for this paper, the forum is asked to note the contents of the report and to support further road safety education, training and publicity activity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Colin. Are there any questions or comments on this paper?
No hands raised, Chair.
No, I don't see any either. Are we agreed to note the contents of this report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to the School Crossing Patroller Assessments, item 6. And Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of this report is to consider requests for school crossing patrollers that have been asked for within South Lanarkshire. The background is set out in section 3 of the papers with reference to the attached summary sheets, and these sheets observe that the sites do not meet the criteria for the provision of school crossing patrollers. Paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4 of the papers set out what the criteria is for requests to be granted. It's also worth noting paragraph 3.6 that this criteria is based upon national practice as developed by ROSPA and Road Safety Great Britain. The criteria has been amended by this Road Safety Forum back in 1998 to make it less onerous to justify a patroller. In terms of this particular paper, there are no employee implications or financial implications. There's no significant risks and there's no impact assessment required. The forum is asked to note that the requests for school cross patrollers at the 3 locations be refused, and those locations are at Cowthally Terrace, at Murray Terrace and Carnwath, Murray Terrace and Cowthally Terrace, another arm of the same junction in Carnwath as well, and Hayley's Hill Road near Wilson Street in Larkhall. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Are there any questions or comments on that paper?
No hands, Chair.
No hands. Okay, thank you. Are we agreed to note the contents of this report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7, which is the safety update from Police Scotland. Timothy, welcome to the forum. I'm afraid you're on mute.
Schoolboy error on UE. Lorna sends her apologies. Any questions I can't answer, I'll ask and get back to you. The purpose of the report is to update the Road Safety Forum on forthcoming campaigns, discuss ongoing national and local campaigns. Background: in terms of the remit of South Lanarkshire Road Safety Forum, it has been agreed that Police Scotland will provide routine updates on national and local issues and campaigns relating to keeping people living and working in South Lanarkshire safer on our roads. Local and national issues: with the lifting of pandemic restrictions, although we are still very cautious, and traffic levels returning to pre-COVID levels, focus remains on driver engagement through education and, where necessary, enforcement. In several campaigns, the Summer Motorcycle Safety Campaign continued to run until the end of September, with weekends of action focused on rural routes and well known for motorcycle use. Operation Snaith commenced at the start of August for 2 weeks. It was a multi-agency campaign with the Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, Home Office and Immigration, Trading Standards and the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. It focused on enforcement of road traffic offences and intelligence gathering on the priority routes throughout Lanarkshire. A summer drink drive campaign and a national speeding campaign and a drug drive campaign were also run during the reporting period. These campaigns resulted in positive engagement, education, the issue of fixed penalties, vehicle seizures, and a number of people reported to the Procurator Fiscal. 2 vulnerable user campaigns were run in the reporting period for pedestrian and cyclists, and the second for driver behaviour on roads in the immediate vicinity of schools. A campaign for speed enforcement on the A73 was run. This focused on driver behaviour in rural villages, which were located on the A73 trunk road. Also, a taxi and private hire action plan in September, focusing on educational enforcement surrounding vehicle documents, roadworthiness of the vehicle, and the driver's fitness to drive. As you can see, there's some statistics there, but they are a bit skewed, obviously, by the pandemic. Speeding is up by 2%. Disqualified drivers down. You can probably, because there's fewer people on the road, so there's fewer people to detect on some of those. But seatbelts and mobile phones are up. Lanarkshire Division are committed to ensuring the road network is safe, along with partners and the Road Safety Governance Board, who has oversight of reviewing all road crashes and offending to provide a proportionate response to any concerns, trends, or patterns identified. There's also a new new driver early intervention scheme. The new joint online training input is up and running, allowing Lanarkshire Division and SFRS to continue with presentations on virtual platforms, ensuring road safety messages are still being delivered to new and nearly new drivers aged between 16 and 25. Social media will continue to be used to publicise the scheme. Campus officers have been trained to deliver the input, and we hope to deliver more inputs in the new year. To date, 15 inputs have been delivered. Cycle Safe Agility, through funding secured from the Community Safety Partnership, Lanarkshire Division delivered cycle safety inputs to 126 young people across Lanarkshire at bike marking events during July and August 2021. And finally, employee implications. There are no employee implications, no financial implications, no significant implications in terms of the climate, and there are no implications for sustainability or risk. That is everything, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Police Scotland. Are there any questions? Councillor Brown.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Davey made the point earlier on that he didn't see in his ward very much by way of police enforcement of speeding, and I must confess that's my impression in my ward too. Maybe anecdotal, you don't always pick these sort of things up. But I wondered really two things. First of all, is there a reduction in the kind of like resource, if you like, the police are devoting to this kind of thing at the moment in terms of speed traps and speed enforcement and all that? And secondly, I'm very struck by the figures at 4.8 on the number of people found to be driving while disqualified, driving with no license, driving with no insurance. And really two things about that. First of all, it is very high, even during the pandemic sort of situation. Does this require further targeting? Can we do anything with the technology in terms of the information from, the national insurance figures and all that? How your insurance and your MOT and all that's on a national computer database, being able to target people there. And secondly, to what extent is that tied in with thefts and taking vehicles without consent?
Well, the first point around are we still targeting speeding? I don't have the figures for that. But one thing I would add is the community police do have speed guns, handheld speed guns that can be used. So if there is a particular problem in a particular area, that can be flagged up and they can be utilised. Obviously, I was in uniform before this role, and you'd regularly hear people don't see you, but you're patrolling at different times, and not everybody's going to see you all the time. But it's always true, more can be done in every situation. So I think it was an area in Hamilton, 20 mile an hour speed limit, Councillor McLachlan mentioned. You can either come through me or through the inspector for Hamilton, and time permitting, I'm sure officers could be resourced to target that area. Obviously, if they can identify particular times where it's worse than others, that is useful. In terms of, I think you were asking about technology, we already do target people who don't have insurance, driving licenses. We already have that information. So from my own experience, we will drive around sort of the beginning of work time to target the addresses of people who don't comply with insurance and driving licenses. We also have PDAs now. I don't know if you're aware of that. So we have our handheld devices. So instead of going through our control room, we can check our registrations and details ourselves. So that's actually been really good. It's much, much quicker. Sorry, I think there was another question, but I can't remember it.
I was conscious that a lot of these things are kind of tied in with obviously safety, no insurance, driving while disqualified, no license, etc. But I just wondered to what extent there were also, as I used to find when I was doing legal work in the courts, that there was also driving away vehicles without consent or theft of vehicles, etc., that lay behind some of these charges.
So some of the people caught stealing vehicles didn't have insurance?
Yeah. The driving while disqualified, if you like, was a follow-on from the theft.
Yeah. I don't have the stats, but I see most of the figures every day, and most of the incidents of note. There's not actually that much when you have theft of vehicles, but taking somebody's car that without their permission is not that usual. We don't get many of those.
Right.
And I can't answer the question about whether the people we catch who've stolen vehicles, whether they've been driving without insurance. From memory, I don't think they're particularly linked.
No. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments for Police Scotland?
No further hands, Chair.
No. Okay. Thank you, Police Scotland. And moving on to our next report, which is from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'll try and keep this brief. All the members had access to the paper beforehand, so I'll just give a quick overview. A couple of points have changed. So on conclusion, I would just ask that this report is noted. If I could draw your attention to item 4.1, it talks about unable to deliver road safety because our safe system of work hasn't been signed off. I'm pleased to announce that yesterday our Assistant Chief Officer signed off on the Community Safety Engagement Safe System of Work So we're now able to bring members of the public back into SFRS premises and carry out education and intervention training. This will be on a case-by-case basis, and individual risk assessments are required to be signed off by the area commander, but it's a very positive step. We can now get a new youth volunteer scheme up and running, and we can get our fire reach scheme up and running. We're just about to notify the successful candidates who applied to be fire reach facilitators, and in both of those courses, road safety is a key part, so it allows us to get that kind of road safety message back across. Item 4.2 is really good news as well on the back of our restructure. I'm sure all the members will be aware that we've now merged from South Lanarkshire and North Lanarkshire areas into a Pan Lanarkshire, the fire and rescue area, that kind of works alongside our colleagues from Police Scotland and NHS. On the back of that, we identified there was some gaps in youth education and road safety possibly. We weren't delivering enough. So we've done a restructure in our department, and we now have a dedicated youth community safety advocate whose sole purpose will be on identifying and engaging with youths in our schools and youth group settings in the evenings and weekends. And we also have a community firefighter, Scott, who is now our area lead on road safety. So we have two really good resources there that kind of complement each other well, and we can then get back into schools and deliver road safety again. I know we've been fortunate, South colleagues in South Lanarkshire Education have granted us access, especially on up to bonfire night, to deliver antisocial behaviour talks. So we're hoping that now we can then progress by getting our kind of winter safety, road safety message back out there. If I can draw your attention, there's some stats there to go over, and it's just to highlight that Q2 last year, everything was down due to the kind of reduced capacity on the road network. We have seen an increase, unfortunately. The fatalities have increased from 1 to 2. The total number of RTCs have increased from 24 to 32. However, pre-pandemic, they were sitting at 38, so we're still, the road traffic levels are increasing back to pre-pandemic level. However, the actual number of RTCs that we're attending haven't kind of went back to where they were before. And I'm pleased to say that there's been a reduction in non-fatal casualties from 28 last year to 19 this year, which again is fantastic considering the increase in the usage of the road network. And to put that last stat in non-fatal casualties into more context, pre-pandemic level, we were sitting at 46 for Q2 in 1920. So that's a fantastic reduction, and that can be attributed to the great kind of partnership working between fire service, police and colleagues in local authority. It shows that what we're doing is working. We just need to keep going and keep driving forward the new initiatives. Future engagements, Tim had highlighted about our online young driver presentation. We've had really good feedback on that. And now with restrictions easing and our new safe system of work, we would be able to welcome young people into our premise, where we can then use the virtual reality headsets that I updated the group on at the last meeting as well. So all positive stuff. I would welcome any questions on that report, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. If I could ask a question, I think some of it you've actually touched upon about the joint working between the local authorities, the fire service and the police, because where each of our remits ends is quite grey in terms of road safety, and there's quite a lot of duplication. In terms of publicity, I know that just very recently South Lanarkshire Council worked well with our schools and also Police Scotland to do some joint publicity, and knowing how key that is to getting the messaging out and further afield than the direct engagement. Is that something that is ongoing already or could be looked at in the future?
I think we can always do better, but we do have kind of local and national social media feeds, and we do regularly post on that road safety messaging internally and our external partners as well. But yeah, more than happy to come on board with any kind of council kind of publicity strategies.
Thank you. Okay, doke. Any other questions or comments for Ben?
No hands, Chair.
No, I don't see any. So all that remains for me to say is that there's no urgent business for this forum to deal with. And thank you for coming. And I would say again, congratulations to Freya at Chapelton Primary on winning the calendar competition, and the other winners as well that will be given the information in due course. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. See you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair.